Hello and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Linda Cohn with the League of Women Voters. August 26th is Women's Equality Day. Each year since 1971, the President of the United States has issued a Women's Equality Day proclamation commemorating the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. It was the 19th Amendment in 1920 that secured for women that most basic right of democracy, the right to vote. It's a continuing source of astonishment to me that there are people alive today, my own mother included, who were born into an America where women did not have the right to vote. One small tick on the national timeline separates us from an indignity that our children cannot even begin to imagine. At the League of Women Voters, we joyfully commemorate Women's Equality Day, but a little ceremony and a little tip of the hat to history is not enough for us. So we sponsor a Rising Star competition, recognizing young men and women who have fulfilled the promise of the 19th Amendment, the idea that men and women together, citizens in equal partnership, can pave the way to a brighter future. This is our way to congratulate and encourage Houston's emerging generation of leaders. We offer our rising stars a year of opportunities to share their talents and expand their reach as models of excellence in civic engagement. We're going to meet 6 of those rising stars this evening. First, Lou Weaver is a consultant with a special interest in GLBT issues. Celeste Byram is a Harris County Assistant District Attorney. And Russ Etherton is a civic engagement specialist at our sister civic organization, Neighborhood Centers, Inc. Let me remind our viewers that we are pleased to take your questions and comments. The number is 713-807-1794. That's 713-807-1794. If you like to use Twitter, you can reach us with the hashtag LWVHouston. Lou Weaver, you first. You're a consultant with a special interest in GLBT issues. Who seeks your services? Is it individuals? Is it corporations? And how do you help?
Mostly it's corporations, companies, medical providers. A lot of times people do not have access to information about the GLBT community. And so I go in there and I talk to them and I help break down the stereotypes of what it's like to be an LGBT person, what that means. About 78% of the population now knows somebody who's gay or lesbian, but only about 7% of the population knows an out transgender person. As an out transgender male myself, I go in and I talk about my area of expertise, my lived experiences, and give them a little bit of background for themselves.
Are these mostly local organizations that seek your advice, or are these national organizations with an outpost in Houston who want to be able to connect directly with the local scene? How does that work?
It depends. I will talk to whoever wants to talk to me, really. Right now, I have a contract with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. I talk to them about how to treat their inmates where it comes to housing and searches, and breaking down the stereotypes that we have around the GLBT community being predators and things like that.
And Russell W. Etherton, you work with Neighborhood Centers, Inc. And I'm going to quote you now from your Rising Star application. Your passion is ensuring that everyone who has the desire and the right to vote can. Tell us a little bit about Neighborhood Centers and a little bit about how you express this passion through Neighborhood Centers.
Yeah, so Neighborhood Centers is Houston and the state of Texas's largest nonprofit organization, serving over 500,000 people on an annual basis here in Houston.
And it has a very long and distinguished history.
We do. We're over 100 years old, started right here in Houston in the East End community. Many people are familiar with our Ripley House neighborhood center, and so that's how we got our starts, but that's not really where we're at right now, we're definitely all over the place. We're getting ready to open our 7th community center, and so a lot of great vibrant work is happening at the community level at neighborhood centers. And a part of my work in that growth is making sure that our citizens, our families, our neighborhoods are actively engaged in both the civic process, but also in things ranging from volunteering with their super neighborhoods and their civic clubs, and making sure moms are participating in the PTA, things like that, engaging them in that civic process.
So it's not just voting. You focused on voting, but it's not just voting. It's the whole landscape of civic engagement, from the schools.
Exactly.
Through the political process.
Exactly. Everything, anything, you know, and there's a lot of research done about what civic engagement is, and there's an institute that said that there are 19 different major focuses or places of civic engagement in a person's life, and my goal is really to make sure that all those 19 areas are really touched upon when a family member comes and visits me at neighborhood centers.
Good. Celeste Byram, you are an assistant district attorney in Harris County, yes. But if I want to make you grin, I know I have to ask you about your work with the Houston Museum of Natural Science.
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, before I get to that, Linda, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. It is such an honor to be a part of an organization that is not only committed to educating voters, but also really celebrates service to the community. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. I have been involved with the Museum of Natural Science since I was probably about 12 years old. I started off as a volunteer there. My first job was there, and I absolutely love being an assistant district attorney. It's very fulfilling, but a few years ago, I decided it was time to go back to also spending my free time volunteering at the museum. And if you haven't been to the museum, I know that you, of course, have told me based on some of our past discussions that, that you love that place too, but there is something for everyone there. You learn something new every time you walk in those doors.
Before this conversation continues, would you like to get in a little plug for Magna Carta?
Sure, absolutely. Okay. If you haven't gone to see the Magna Carta exhibit, now is the time. We're running out of days. It's absolutely spectacular. And if you want to see the basis of American law, that's the primary source right there. So if you haven't gone, it's not too late. You still have time.
Thanks, Celeste. Lou, we're going to go back to you and ask you to give us a little bit of your personal narrative, because nobody springs from the womb knowing that they have to participate in civic life, knowing that they have to be part of their community and wanting to be a vibrant part of that community. Tell us a little bit about your personal journey. Was civic engagement popular in your family? Was it popular at family dinners?
No. When I grew up, I'm a lot older than I look, so I grew up, when there wasn't a gay and lesbian community, we still talked about gay men being light in their loafers or women living with their sisters. And so there were no role models for me growing up. I came out 6 weeks shy of my 19th birthday. And I came out as a lesbian. I was a female-identified person. But even then, Melissa Etheridge wasn't out, Ellen DeGeneres. So growing up without role models was very difficult. And then when I was trying to find my way and figure out who I was and realized that I was a transgender man, still I didn't have any role models. So when I came out and I was able to live my life and become me and found some people and I found a community that embraced me, I wanted to be able to give back. I wanted to be able to make sure that other people weren't feeling alone when they were out there. And so it just became incredibly important for me to be able to model that type of behavior for somebody else so they didn't feel alone. And then I found ways to get involved and really make a difference for people. And that turned into me being a consultant, just because there are so many people. When I first came out 7 years ago as a transgender man here in the 4th largest city in the United States, next to the world's largest medical center, I had trouble finding access to medical care. Simple hormone replacement therapy that I needed, that my community needed, and we had access to 3 doctors that would provide that for us.
So you have personal experience that gives you inspiration?
Yes, yes.
And you hope to share that with others?
Exactly.
Is that fair enough?
Yes. When you don't have access to medical care and you feel like you're less than, what do you do? Right? I can sit here and complain about it, or I can get involved and start talking to people and trying to figure out how I can make a difference. And because I really thought that medical providers were not providing access to health care because of bias and hatred. But what I found out since then is the fact that we don't have access to medical care because doctors are not getting the type of training to help people. So how can we rectify that? How can we fix that?
Let me ask you a very personal question. When you went to school, university and so forth. Did you have an idea that social issues and the public sphere was going to be your calling?
No, I always wanted to be a salesperson. I like to sell stuff. I like to do marketing. My degree,
Not so far removed from what you do now. You're selling.
Well, I'm selling
You're
my
selling
community,
the cause of civic
right?
engagement.
Exactly, and so I got to attach that to this. I always thought that I was going to work for, like, the Houston Dynamo. I'm a passionate soccer fan, and do this in my spare time. But I found a way to make this, being civically involved and being engaged and helping other people, not just a passion, but also my work, my job.
Support from your family, or do they want you to get a regular 9-to-5 job?
No, my mother is very proud of me. She enjoys watching me on TV, seeing what I'm doing, seeing that I am helping people. I mean, I'm sure she'd be just as proud if I had a 9-to-5 job, but I think she enjoys this and knowing that she helped to raise me and make me so involved.
Yeah, you have written about the importance of encouraging gay, lesbian, transgendered people who are not quite, maybe a little bit active in political life, to run for office.
It's really important.
And to, as part of their campaign, make reference
Right.
to their identity.
Well, I think it's so
why
important.
is it so important to have people who are totally out of the closet on the ballot?
Well, if you see somebody like Mayor Parker, right? She's the mayor, an out, open lesbian mayor of the 4th largest city in the United States. That changes the narrative around the conversation. People can't talk about us if we're right there. They have to talk to us. So we can have these conversations, share our insights and everything else, and have people be better informed about the decisions they're making that will affect the whole entire community. If I wasn't an out, open transgender man and having these conversations with other people, people might not know somebody like me, right? And so what directly affects my life? Did a lot of people say, well, I advocate for healthcare with Shell or with these other corporations. Well, that's great, but now the doctors need to be educated, right? So there's a multi-step process on how we can get people involved. And when people come out and run for office, and they're out there having these conversations, it helps everybody. It really elevates the status of our community. When I was growing up, like I said, there weren't any role models. But then when Ellen DeGeneres came out, and Melissa Etheridge, that really changed the narrative. When Neil Patrick Harris came out, they helped change the narrative around gay men. Right? And so when Chaz Bono went on TV with Dancing with the Stars, that changes that. But it also, when we see people like this publicly engaged and running for office, then it says that we care. We care about our communities, we care about our families and everything else. And so that really helps show people that they should be passionate about this. They should get involved.
Thanks. Russ, did you always want to be a civic engagement powerhouse?
I'm actually not from Houston, and so I'm still learning Houston, and it's been a fun and enjoyable learning experience. I kind of came into this sort of civic and community engagement when I first moved to Houston, and I, of course, got on Mayor Parker's campaign and did some field work with them as an intern. And
were you a student when you came to Houston?
I actually came to Houston for the University of Houston, and it was interesting because I only applied to one university. It was the University of Houston, and I did get in. And so I came here and I got engaged and active in that campaign, and that led me to something else, and then I kind of came to neighborhood centers, and along that way I had been meeting communities and learning about, coming from Louisville, Kentucky, where the demographics are not as I'm trying to think of the best word to use.
Well, now Houston does have a very particular demographic. We are growing, we are vibrant.
And exactly, and that's what I love about Houston. And I wanted to be a part of that. In this short, my mother asked me all the time, when are you gonna move back home? Well, you can't find real Indian food in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I got engaged, and I've been a part of these communities, and everyone I've ever sort of met when doing this kind of work has always been very accepting and very let's come and let's have a conversation. And in those conversations, I've always been a big proponent of being an active participant in their civic community and making sure that people are engaged. And so it's something that I've kind of grown into, but it's certainly something that I've loved, and it's something that I personally and others have felt I've excelled at, in making sure that the conversation is not one of of damnation and why aren't you engaged? It's one of join us in this conversation, in this cause, because together our impact can be greater. As
no finger wagging.
Exactly, exactly.
And you started with volunteer work?
I did. I started as a volunteer.
What were you majoring in at the University of
Political science. Political science, and of course, very, very big, love public policy and love studying public policy. And so I did start as a volunteer. I worked on the Houston Counts project with Mayor Parker when she first became mayor, and that's how I got engaged with neighborhood centers.
Celeste, you a native Houstonian?
Well, I'm actually from Dallas, but I moved here and completed high school here in Houston. I moved away for a while to go to college and then law school. And when it was time for me to start looking about where I wanted to settle down, this was the place that just seemed vibrant. It had a lot of opportunities, and it seemed like a great place to settle down for my career.
But you were engaged with the Houston community even before you made that decision as an adult.
Correct.
How old were you when you started at the Houston Museum of Natural Science?
I was 12. I was part of that eco team program.
Yeah. So anything else going on in the Houston community attract you?
Well, there was a really great district attorney's office. That's what brought me back here for the job afterwards. It was an office that had great resources, that I knew was committed to helping the community, to listening to victims' needs, and had the resources to really help them seek justice. And I thought that that was a really exciting opportunity.
And in your family, a lot of support?
Yes, for my career, absolutely. My father's an attorney. He's a civil one. I went to law school to do art law because my background is in art history, and which I should have known that I was going to be a prosecutor because Law and Order was always my favorite TV show. And yet here I thought I was going to be this art attorney, and then I found prosecution and realized there are people out there in the community that have been the victims of violent crimes and they need a voice. And for the first time I realized I can be an attorney and still help others. And that was really exciting to me. So after interning in Travis County, that's in Austin, they said, if you want to be a prosecutor, you have to go to Houston. Harris County District Attorney's Office has the resources. They have lots of opportunity for you to grow.
And all three of you, even with careers that take up a huge amount of time, that require a huge amount of dedication, there's always time in your lives for that volunteer work. How do you manage that, Lou? Is it really kind of seamless? Is it really kind of seamless for you?
Sometimes it can be harder than others, right? You know, how do you balance supposed to be three places at the same time, or picking and choosing which?
Because each of you, in the space of this week alone, what you did after 5 p.m. was a lot more exciting for us to talk about than what you did before 5 p.m. And it just kind of surges forward in a seamless way because it's who you are, not what you do.
Right. And so that's so important, right? Is it so many times we start a conversation with what do you do, right? Well, that's what I do for my job, but what am I passionate about, right? That's really will tell you a lot more about me. And it like you said, it can be hard, it can be a difficult thing, but if I'm passionate about it, it's what keeps me going. Meeting new people and having these kind of conversations is what's really exciting. There was a happy hour last week for the League of Women Voters. I didn't make it, Celeste did, but even those opportunities to interact with other people and what they're doing and how we can connect. And I think that's what makes me happy, but also just making sure I take care of my downtime. I'm an introvert by nature, so I also need that time to be able to go home and relax and reflect on everything and recharge myself and get back out there.
I want to second what Lou said. Yes, absolutely. It's not just helping others. I get things out of it too. Exactly what he said. When I go volunteer at the Museum of Natural Science, I'm meeting people from the Houston community that I might not ever meet otherwise. That's really exciting. And when you have a 6-year-old kid that knows more about a T-Rex than you do, and you learn something from them, that's really cool. I'm also really involved with the Junior League of Houston, and we do a lot of volunteer work. And again, I'm getting good stuff out of that too. I have made lasting friendships with people that are committed to service in this community that I might not have had if I hadn't been spending some spare time volunteering. That's exciting.
That's why you're all rising stars, in case you didn't figure that out before. Because civic engagement, civic life is part of your life in all its many facets. Russ, go ahead.
I was going to say, you're dedicated to the cause when you're at a bar, or, you're out in let's say you're at a social event and you reach someone, you realize, are you registered to vote? And that's your first question. You're like, are you registered to vote? Well, let's take care of you right now.
Yeah. We talk about promoting civic engagement. We do it frequently. We do it informally. It's part of the conversation of our lives. And it's so probably ingrained with you that you don't even think about it unless I'm asking you the question. Let me jump to another topic. In your Rising Star applications, you all talked about social media. Is that the wave of the future, Russ?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was actually listening to, and I feel social media is moving so quickly. I feel old now. From like I thought I was tweeting and I was Facebooking, Instagramming, and now there's like Snapchat and all these other different sort of applications, and I'm talking to my sister and her friends and I'm like, I have no idea what any of that is. And I was listening this morning on NPR, and Google's talking about driverless cars and robots that do checking for legal applications, and I'm like, there is so much happening so quickly. I feel like it's impossible to keep up with social media and the way of technology is moving.
And yet, if you're not engaged in social media, you've got big problems.
Right.
Yeah.
So we try and keep up as much as we can, but you're right. I think that here I am just now getting the hang of tweeting, and you're right. Now Snapchat is what all the kids are doing these days.
But a part of it is kind of interesting to think about is that, there's a radio station in Canada that's looking to shorten songs by just a few seconds to add some more songs. So is our attention span going? Is it shortening? And so, because I was thinking Twitter, you're trying to fit 140 characters in, and then these shortening of these songs, and it's like, so it's an interesting conversation to have, is how fast is it?
And do you start thinking in tweets, as opposed to these more elaborate, more fully developed, complete sentences and paragraphs that were treasured up until about 20 years ago? You know that your Rising Star application, the first 3 questions, we asked you to provide responses that were in the form of a tweet.
Which is hard. It's
hard.
Very hard to do. It's like, how do you create a clear and concise thought in such a short amount of space?
Nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted. And very often we find that it forces you to have a tighter, clearer picture of what you're actually trying to say. Do you use Twitter and other social media in your work as a consultant?
Yeah, it's so important to be able to pass on ideas and talk about the things that are going on and to keep up to date. It's like, if I'm not following Twitter or Facebook, then I'm not following enough of what's going on in the communities and know what's really important to other people.
Your clients expect this of you then?
Oh yeah, because I need to be up to date on what's going on. I need to have a clear, concise message. When I go in and talk about the jail policies, I need to know what other policies are going on across the country, what's affecting other people, and this is real time that I can happen and have it right here. It also helps me have conversations with many people at the same time that are working on the same things, whereas in the past that would have been a lot more difficult.
Celeste, do you use it at? I know you use it at the Museum of Natural Science.
Yes.
Do you use it in your work with the district attorney?
Well, obviously I use it a lot in my personal life, and yes, I use it with some of my volunteering through the museum and the Junior League. There's some trickier issues though with my job, because so much of what I do is sensitive. So I typically leave the tweeting and the Facebooking about my job to the professionals in our office.
Okay, here's the philosophical question then. These wonderful tools that we use to a very wholesome purpose, last day to register to vote, put a tweet out, get those applications in. The very tools that we use to a wholesome purpose are also available to others whose goals may not exactly warm the cockles of our heart. How do you balance that out, Russ? Have you thought about that?
It's with anything. I think that if it wasn't on social media and Twitter, it would be in conversation with other people. So you know, you just do the best that you can, and a lot of the time, I love Twitter chats and things where you have an opportunity to create hashtags and then you engage people in conversations, because I think that's really where meaningful dialogue happens these days, especially for a population of people, young people, who are using Twitter, engaging them in something that they don't necessarily want to talk about, voting and civic engagement, and using Twitter and Facebook as an avenue to talk about those topics of which they're not necessarily concerned about at the time. And so it's like, have you registered to vote is not necessarily as important in real time to someone who's at a bar or who's doing something else that isn't necessarily thinking about election day that is coming up. And so utilizing those tools to reach those populations.
Yeah, very often we hear people say you got to reach people where they are.
Exactly.
You've all heard that. And Twitter and other places is where they are. What about you, Celeste? Do you think we're on the cusp of something where it could go either way, where we have to kind of watch it because misinformation gets out there just as abundantly as truth and goodness?
Absolutely. And I think that we've seen that in the media. We see it every day in the media. We know that there is a word that's being spread that we know is not true. I mean, sometimes we see that on our cases. The media gets involved, they take something and they run with it that may not be accurate. But on the other hand, I agree with Russell that if there is a dialogue that's sparked, we shouldn't be afraid of a view that's contrary to our own. That doesn't mean we have to embrace it, but if it starts a meaningful conversation, I think that can be a useful tool to help you define what your own ideas and ideals are. And sometimes your mind is changed by those things. So I can understand the dangers, but at the same time, I think that the benefits of a meaningful dialogue outweigh the dangers.
Lou, is that your opinion as well? Have you seen this play out in your work?
Oh, definitely. I've been involved with the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance as part of the community coming up and saying, hey, we need this. This is what we need to help move Houston in the right direction. And we've heard a lot of backlash about no unequal rights. We shouldn't, this is a special interest case. This is for a certain amount of minorities. This is a sexual predator bill. We've heard all of these negative things that have happened, these words, these sound bites, if you will, that are going out to the communities about why we shouldn't have this. But it enables us to go and get involved. And because of social media, we can find out where these conversations are taking place
almost in real time.
Right? And we can have these real-time conversations. We, a group of us went the other day to a town hall forum type thing with the Progressive Times, or the Forward Times, I think, here in town. And we got to have a conversation with people we wouldn't have been able to have otherwise, because we knew about it, because we were watching on social media and looking for this, and being able to have, like, oh yes, these are myths. Let's talk about the reality of these types of things.
We're coming to the close of our conversation. Lou, 30 seconds. What do we need to know about you and your work in the Houston community?
I think it's really important to understand that LGBT people are the same as everybody else, and not everybody wants to educate everybody. I'm here to educate people if that's what I love to do. I love to talk about my community and sell my community, and we're exactly the same as everybody else. We all got up and put our pants on the same way this morning.
Thanks, Lou. Russ, what do we need to know about you, neighborhood centers, and civic engagement?
I think that there's a lot of great things happening in Houston and Harris County, and a lot of great work that's being done. Of course, as it goes, Harris County, what's the old saying? So goes Harris County, goes the rest of the country, and so there are a lot of great things that we're seeing here that the rest of the country is going to have to deal with later. So we're ready to share that information and that dialogue.
Celeste?
I think that we've covered a lot of it, but I agree. Similar to you, I think that sometimes people have misunderstandings about what the role is of a prosecutor. Ultimately, we're people too, and we're people that are committed to wanting to help the victims in our community and help make Harris County and Houston in particular a safer place. Also, as I've mentioned before, my true passion is the Museum of Natural Science, so come. I'm usually in the Paleontology Hall on Saturdays or Sundays. You can find me there and I'll give you a tour.
Awesome. You're all optimists. You're all optimists. That's wonderful. We're going to take a short break. We'll post some information on our Rising Stars program. And if you're eligible, please go to our website and apply. And if you're not eligible, I bet you know someone who is. Please send them to our website as well. Be back in a minute with Rising Stars Courtney Siegfried, Michael Webb, and Veronica Chappa. See you soon. Welcome back to Public Affairs, Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Linda Cohn with the League of Women Voters, and I'm joined this evening by Carolyn Mata, who's the president of the League of Women Voters of the Houston area. We're talking with our rising stars this evening. We're going to learn a little bit about them, about their commitment to civic engagement. But first, Carolyn, we offer Rising Stars. This is a group of competitively selected individuals, young men and women between 25 and 40 years old. We offer them a year of opportunities to share their talents and work with us on civic engagement projects. Tell us a little bit about what Rising Stars have done with us in the past year.
Well, Rising Stars have helped us with our fundraising in a big way, and they're going to do so the same this fall with our another Rising Stars event, which is a fundraising event.
So they're refreshing our organization, even as we give our Rising Stars opportunities to expand their reach.
It's a two-way street here. And they've been very instrumental in putting on our repast, our big fundraiser. I mean, we do more than fundraisers, but we do fundraisers so we can get out to vote. But they've been very instrumental in the fundraising aspects, for one thing.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit in our previous segment about Women's Equality Day. Not only does August 26th represent Women's Equality Day and the passage of the 19th Amendment,
Yes.
it also represents a milestone for the League of Women Voters. It's how we came into being. It's our organizational beginning.
Our birthday?
Not quite our birthday, but our organization. We're a direct descendant of the women's suffrage movement. Tell us a little bit about that.
The women's suffrage? The women's suffrage
The women's suffrage movement, the mission was accomplished with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. And rather than abandon this wonderful organization that existed on a national level and state by state by state, it was repurposed to the League of Women Voters to become the League of Women Voters, the organization that we know today.
Yes.
Providing trusted, nonpartisan information so that everybody, men and women, could cast an informed ballot.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
we have our voters' guides, for example.
You've asked me a lot of questions. I'll see what I can do. Well, just to reiterate, you know, the League of Women Voters came out of that period of time around 1920 when there were a lot of improvements in the country, working conditions. Women went to factories and worked all day long with no break. And so it was a time of reform in a lot of ways. And the League of Women Voters was one such organization that was active during that time, although the outcome was a little different. But they did succeed in forming their organization and then allowing women to vote for the first time. And it was more than allowing women to vote. It was wanting women to be involved in politics, informed and involved in political office, and involved in making decisions, which was a pretty big step at that time.
Yeah, and our famous voters' guides were up and running in some places as early as 1919. And in Houston, there was a voters' guide in 1920.
Wow.
The League of Women Voters of the Houston area was established in 1920, and they had these mimeograph machines. Everybody's going to run to Wikipedia now to find out what a mimeograph machine was. It was a very early copying process. And we asked questions of voters, of candidates, so that voters can review the candidate answers.
Yes.
And decide whose views fit their own, who they wanted to vote for.
And I don't have the list in front of me, but there was a lot of prominent women who made that happen at that time. It's a very impressive list.
A very impressive, we stand on the shoulders of giants.
We do.
Let's meet our rising stars. Michael Webb with Legacy Community Health. Yep. Tell us a little bit you and about Legacy Community Health.
Well, I'm a beginning community advocate, first off. I started with Legacy Community Health over a year ago. And Legacy Community Health Services is pretty much a clinic, a community clinic that provides premium health care to anyone regardless of your insurance status or your economic status. So it pretty much, we try our best to equalize access to care. Premium cares, not just, you know, low budget, quote unquote, care. So I'm very proud to work for an organization that works very diligently for the communities that we serve.
Tell me about the HIV/AIDS study that you were instrumental in.
Well, I'm part of two studies at Legacy. One was a PrEP study, which PrEP is pretty much an HIV prevention pill. It's a once-a-day pill, almost like a vitamin, that people who want to add additional protections against HIV can take. It's for people who are HIV negative, and it reduces your chances of contracting HIV by 97%. So it's a very, very effective way of preventing an HIV infection. However, it is a slow rollout, mostly because people, mostly healthcare professionals, do not know how well PrEP will work in the real world. So ideally you take a pill once a day, but specifically with gay men, is it realistic to expect someone to take a pill that they don't necessarily have to take? 'Cause they're not infected with HIV. So, and it only works if you take it every day.
Is your background in medicine?
My background is not in medicine. My background is actually in politics, program development. So this was an interesting career choice.
Is that social science?
I studied political science in college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, Courtney Siegfried, you're with the 20K Group. Tell us about that. It's a consultant firm.
Yes, we're a strategic communications agency and have historically worked with a lot of nonprofits and even on a couple of political campaigns.
An agency with a conscience.
Yes, we like to say we're an agency with a conscience.
How does that play out?
The firm was actually started by my mom 12 years ago, and she has a long history of working with nonprofits in Houston all the way back to her corporate days. And then when I came on board, I had been involved in international development and had finished a master's degree in nonprofit management. So really wanted to prioritize our work with nonprofits and the community. So we came up with the tagline that we're a strategic communications agency with a conscience.
Well, does that mean state-of-the-art communications, the latest in technology?
No, not telecom. It's
okay.
Things like branding and public relations and communications training and coaching.
Thank you. Veronica Chapa, you work for the City of Houston.
I do.
Tell us about that.
I'm the government person. I'm a deputy director at the City of Houston Housing and Community Development Department. It's a pass-through agency for most of the funding that comes from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So we're a city department, but we actually receive millions of dollars every year to invest those in the community. Most recently, we've actually received $173 million to do disaster recovery investment as a result of Hurricane Ike. And so what we do is everything from provide grant funding for social services that support children or elderly care, down to subsidies for people who need a voucher to rent an apartment, to a place that's a shelter to sleep at night, to apartment complexes that have rent restrictions.
How do you make your presence known throughout the community? How do people know to get in touch with you if they have that particular kind of need?
So typically we have partners that do the work in the community, so either nonprofit organizations,
okay, so it's not a direct
stakeholders. No, we do very few direct services, primarily because it's a capacity issue. We're the fourth largest city in the country and one agency alone can't do the work. And so it's really the value of the nonprofit partners like Legacy and neighborhood centers that you've heard today that has been really key to doing this development in Houston.
Well, I wanted to ask you something. Isn't it true that there's a lot of parts of Houston that nobody lives in, they're so run down, and are some of these funds used to buy that up and
that's a great
perhaps get that developed so they could earn tax dollars and then provide a place for people to live?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's pretty complex. And the complexity is that the city is 625 square miles. And so I couldn't say whether or not there's a particular area that's absolutely vacant or barren that has to be redeveloped. I think where I've been most active is that there's actual communities that need revitalization. So like everything else, there's life cycles, even in neighborhoods. And you see, I heard the Heights used to be terrible 20 years ago, and right now the home prices are as such that everyone's placed out. You have the same thing in the Washington corridor. You see that in the near north side and a lot of the inner loop revitalization areas. And so that's really, I think, where the focus is. There's tremendous growth, tremendous opportunity, diversity for those things to happen.
Well, I was going to say, you can hardly drive around the city without seeing a mega apartment or condo going up. You know, they take the whole corner block. I mean, they're everywhere, everywhere.
We're going to circle back and talk a little bit about yourselves and how you became involved with civic engagement. We've touched on that a little bit. When you went to school, did you know that this was going to be a calling in addition to your professional calling, Veronica?
So technically my title is Deputy Director of Compliance. And I joke around that no one grows up saying they want to be an auditor when they grow up, that's not something that you aspire to. I knew that I was going to be engaged in public service early on because my sisters and I were kind of brought up very much to give to the community. I'm from South Texas, I'm from the Rio Grande Valley, and so the advocacy piece is just part of something that we've learned to really take to heart, because we represent a lot of communities. We're from communities that have been historically very disadvantaged, and the reality from changing that is someone speaking out and getting engaged and saying, telling their narrative, telling your story. And so we learned at a very early age that from our community, if we wanted to make a significant change, that you had to get involved and you had to speak up no matter how nervous you were.
You have siblings?
I do.
Did they follow the same path, coming from a household like that?
Interestingly, two more women coming. God help us all. They're wonderful women. One of them is a public education teacher in an inner city high school in McAllen. The other is an attorney who now specializes with employment.
So civic engagement was part of the family dinner table conversation.
Yeah, it was more of an expectation.
Courtney, you've already told us that your family business has continued with you. Your siblings, did they take to it as you did, or have they gone off in other directions?
I actually grew up an only child.
Okay.
So I think that duty fell on me happily. And I don't think that I necessarily knew that I would become as passionate as I am.
Well, you had a role model
community.
very close to home.
I did. I feel very fortunate.
That might make a difference.
To have a mother who really took me along from a very young age to charity walks that maybe the companies she worked with were sponsoring, or things like delivering air conditioning units to the elderly during the summers. So from a very young age, I saw that, absolutely. But I think maybe in college it fell off a little bit, got wrapped up in sort of the college life. And it wasn't until I went into the Peace Corps after school that it really ignited my passion to work with.
Where were you in the Peace Corps?
I was in Tanzania in East Africa and actually doing HIV education work.
Wow.
So what Michael's doing now, I appreciate a lot and have a lot of admiration for that. But I came back really, really excited and motivated to continue that work in my own country. I'd seen so much over there, and then came back and thought, like, it's now my duty to try to make a difference and to really engage in the democracy that I think we're really fortunate to have at home.
Yeah, one of the things, again, that all our rising stars talk about is social media. Michael, do a lot of work with social media?
I do more work with Facebook more so than Twitter. I know Twitter is a big thing, especially for the League of Women Voters. I mostly use Twitter to help, pass along news articles and things of that nature, very dorky stuff. But Facebook, I do most of my sort of motivating others to take action.
Is it the wave of the future? We talked about this a little bit with the previous group of rising stars, and everybody seems to agree that it's there. You have to use it. But I do wonder if it's going to trip us up somewhere along the line. Are we going to get too used to thinking in little itty-bitty snippets of conversation?
I think it helps us be a little bit more effective with our messaging systems or our messaging techniques, because realistically speaking, when you talk to someone, you only get 5 seconds of their attention. So when you're speaking in paragraphs, you're not necessarily being effective with your messaging system. So teaching us to, speak more pointed and more sort of clearly and get, I guess, to the subject matter quicker, actually just makes them more effective communicators, I would say.
If I could, what I like about Facebook is the pictures, the visual aspect. I mean, the stories. You can hear what people say, but to see where they traveled. And of course, many of my friends show me what they had for dinner. But, there's that.
Carolyn, we do a lot with social media at the League of Women Voters.
We do.
We probably do more with social media than any other local league in the United States.
We do.
We have more
We're
followers.
proud of it too.
We are very proud of it. And what we have found is that it is an enormously effective tool for drawing attention. But then you got to take it one step further. You got to deliver on the soundbite chatter and really take it from there. But I'm kind of surprised in a little way, Michael, that you can use an issue as critical as personal health
Well,
on Facebook.
it's actually quite inspirational. The first person I saw come out about their status was via Facebook, and that sort of gave me the inspiration to come out about my status on Facebook. And then I saw sort of like a domino effect with a lot of people coming out about that status, and that's very, very necessary for our community, because a large part of why people are not connecting to care or not getting tested is based off of fear, and based off of fear of the unknown. So when you're seeing people living healthy when it comes to certain sort of health challenges, I think that's inspirational for a lot of people, and social media has provided that avenue.
Courtney, in your professional work, you use social media?
We do quite a bit, and we have helped clients develop their own digital strategy. So I'm a big fan of social media. And
So even though it looks like it's an impromptu surge, there's a strategy behind it?
There's a strategy, usually. I think, you know, there's obviously the grassroots groundswells that happen.
The very well orchestrated grassroots groundswells, is that?
Fair enough, yeah. But I'll take the counterpoint to sort of the attention span question that you asked earlier, because I do see a negative impact on communication skills. And I think a large part of that's because of learning to think in 140 characters, or even in a Snapchat. You heard Russell talk about Snapchat earlier. And I find myself doing the same thing, where I can hardly sit through a TV show without checking my phone 25 times.
We're addicted.
We're addicted.
To the new information, communication, something.
Constantly, right? There's such an influx of that information, and how much we're retaining it, I'm not sure. And whether or not we're going to retain the ability to talk face to face, or to expand on our ideas so that there's still beautiful literature that comes out of, you know, future generations. But I think I've had a passion recently of talking to people entering their careers about how to use social media to support, not hurt your career. But within that, I also encourage them to practice things like mindfulness and unplugging, whether that's for meditation or something else, so that their brain gets that break from that constant influx that Carolyn talked about.
Veronica, do you use social media as part of government strategies?
So interestingly, we do, but we have folks that are actually committed to that particular piece. I use social media a little bit differently. I don't only do Facebook, I do LinkedIn, and I have other social media accounts, and they have different interests. So where you're going to see my League of Women Voters, my civic engagement piece is more likely on the Facebook, but where you'll probably see the professional articles that I like to read and put out there, I'll put them on LinkedIn. And then of course Pinterest, because who isn't pinning?
Oh, you like that? I don't pin.
One thing that came across in our previous discussion, and again now, is you're all optimists. Where do you see Houston 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Carolyn, I'll start with you, because you've seen a great deal of change in Houston.
You know, what I tell people, I was in California recently. They don't understand about Houston, but you know, every day I wake up and I can't wait to read the paper to see what's happening. There's always something happening in Houston. It's so dynamic. There's so much going on internationally in every way.
And may I just add that our rising stars, when you look at our rising stars, this is one reason why Houston is dynamic. It's a continual snowball effect. You see people, dynamic, bright, civically engaged people. And that calls forth greater and greater surges of people of a like mind, not for any particular policy or for any particular political point of view, but just the idea of being engaged, having an opportunity to state your case and persuade others. Houston does that very, very well.
Well, I think it's a good place to live, and people are going to a lot of trouble to make it more beautiful. Like, for instance, that Bio Greenway project, that's a huge, you've been by there to see that, it's huge. And it's really going to be something when it's through.
Sure. Michael Webb, where do you see Houston? And where do you see your particular segment of the Houston community 10, 20 years from now?
Well, that's an interesting question. Okay. I see Houston 10 years from now being recognized for being the socially progressive city that we are. I feel like Houston is oftentimes stereotyped as a very sort of socially conservative, the traditional stereotypes are
Cowboys or
attached
something.
to Texas. But Houston is actually like a lightning rod of progressive thought processes. And that's being shown during the hero movement, that's been shown with the type of elected officials we elect to various positions. And I'm excited to see how we broadcast that nationally and locally. With my specific community, I'm excited to see my community. I'm assuming you mean the gay black community.
Well, I was
or
just thinking
just the
about
gay
health
community.
care.
Oh,
Health
okay.
care as well. Tell us about both. Tell us about both.
Interesting. I see my community, my cultural community, being more involved in traditional political processes. I think there's been a little bit of fear of getting involved based off of historical or history, but I think Hero really woke a lot of people up, and I'm excited to see how we take that energy and that motivation in 10 years. When it comes to healthcare, again, like Houston's already like ahead of the game when it comes to getting people access to premium healthcare, especially when Legacy is like a lead, sort of a leader in that arena here in Houston. I don't know how much. I mean, Legacy can just expand more.
Well,
beyond
is
the
there going to be a
14
need
sites
for
that we already
legacy
have.
community health 10, 20 years from now, or will the healthcare landscape be altered in a way that you don't have these segments underserved here, Cadillac here? What do you think?
I would say, well, I don't say. I would say I don't have.
Are you going to be so good you're going to put yourself out of business? That's what I'm asking.
I would love to, well, for my specific area in the healthcare field, I would love to be put out of business. I would love to not to have to worry about identifying someone who's HIV positive, they don't know their status. I would love to see fewer of that in 10 years. So yes, hopefully, put me out of business. Let's put me out of business.
Veronica, what do you think?
So
10 years from now, 20 years from now?
This city is already amazing, and to see the growth in the last 4 years in terms of specifically the growth of the international community and the food culture in this town.
We're foodies.
Oh, it is, cannot be
Big time.
paralleled. Wonderful, wonderful.
Food trucks.
And that's only going to get better, I think, with the more diversity of the population that you get. In terms of how the city develops, you know, earlier there was the comments about the apartment complexes, and the truth is the downside with everybody wanting to live here is we got to find places for everybody to live. So I think the change in the landscape is really going to be a visual change where you'll have more integrated mixed-use spaces, deliberate green
But
spaces.
at least they're going up in density. No, they're not going out this way anymore.
Sure, but with that comes even a change in the value systems of does everybody have to have their green little piece of yard anymore? Or could we have a communal yard? And I think these are the kind of issues that we're going to have to address, and it's going to challenge our value systems, because the reality is, as large as this city is, it's a bunch of towns and a bunch of neighborhoods, and people very much like your neighborhood tradition, the aesthetic, and those kind of things are.
Are people going to look to the government, to the City of Houston government for guidance in this, or is the growth that you speak and the changes that you speak of, is it going to be more organic? Is government going to be the leader, or is it going to respond to something that's growing from the ground up?
That is such a complex question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. I'm going to stipulate the city part. Okay, so with my city hat, the city is kicking off a general plan for the city that's going to identify a series of values that we can use as guiding principles for future development. That is something that's led by the planning department, not the department I work for, but one that's being held citywide. I think the challenge for me personally is I think that this works better through collaboration. I have a value of collaboration and engagement personally, and that comes across professionally as well. I don't want to use my agency to lead and tell you how to live. I want to ask you, how do you see the neighborhood of the future, and bring you in on that conversation and do whatever I can to make it happen.
Thanks, Veronica. The last word is to you, Courtney. 20 years from now, where are we going to be?
I'm a native Houstonian, so I've seen Houston go through that boom and bust cycle. But what I think is different about now is the energy that the people have and the pride in their city that's different. So in 10, 20 years, I really see Houston being well respected on the national stage and on the international stage, because as Veronica mentioned, we are such an international city. If you look at Stephen Kleinberg's research, he says that the world should be watching us, and the U.S. in particular should be watching us because we're already the city of the future. We already look like that in terms
And we
of
get
Thank you,
along pretty
Courtney.
well, all things considered, don't you think?
Thank you, Courtney.
I think we do.
And thank you, Carol Amata, President of the League of Women Voters of Houston. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation this evening and that maybe you picked up a bit of insight and inspiration along the way. Remember to apply to our Rising Stars class of 2014-2015. Applications are in progress right now. We'll pick the best of the best and offer successful candidates a year of opportunities to learn, to share, and to become the civic engagement powerhouses, all to the benefit of the Houston community. Visit us at lwvhouston.org. I'm Linda Cohn with the League of Women Voters. Thanks for watching. Take good care, and we'll chat again soon.